I ended up as effectively in business development, but I was on every side of the fence. So I've worked for agencies, I've worked for rights holders, I've worked for broadcasters, and in that role you have to get out and about and you have to meet people. Training as an accountant taught me more about selling than anything else, because in those days I used to go off to strange places like Walthamstow to do audits, and actually getting information out of people who thought you were there to actually prove that they didn't know how to do their job or they should be made redundant was actually a great training. So in a funny way, apart from teaching me to be numerate, and I had no long-term ambitions to be an accountant, and I think it's a bit like being a lawyer, is that it's a great grounding to have if you want to work in the sports business, because having a knowledge of sport doesn't really mean anything. We all know lots about sport. What you've actually got to do is have a skill set, and if that skill set should be the law or accountancy or languages, whatever it is, you need to know something, and sport is becoming increasingly specialist now. You need to know a particular trade or skill. So I think there's less generalists now working in sport. There's always been a crossover between certain sports. I think, for example, tennis and golf. I was at IMG for 6 years and those sort of sports, and then there were certain sports that lived in their own world, of which I would say, for example, horse racing and boxing, where they are their own worlds, really. And if you work you have to be on the inside in that sport. You don't see a huge amount of crossover. But I think increasingly you have to be specialist in the sports business, yeah. I think you get to a certain point in life when all your friends have got children who just want to get a job, so they always ring up and say, can we come and talk to you about being in the sports business? And they say, I want to be in management. And I say, what do you want to do? And they say, I want to manage footballers and everything. And I say, are you really sure you want to do that? And so very often they don't want to do that. They just like the idea. It's like if you were 17 years old and somebody came and said, would you like to work at a strip club? You'd probably say, yeah, that'd be great. But actually, do I know anything about it? No, I don't. It just seems like a good idea. And I think there are some people who still think, well, I work in sport because I can't think of anything else and I like sport. But actually knowing, reading the sports pages is not going to help you get a job in sport, because anyone can do that. I mean, I always say it's a slightly strange industry that there are a lot of people employed in the sport in crossover. I mean, nobody would ever ask you or me to go and run a hospital because I don't know anything about it. But we do see people often employed in sport who come from other parallel universes, and very often it doesn't work. I think you do really need to know the business of sport and know the community of sport, and you have to have goodwill and contacts within sport if you're really going to progress, which is why I often say to people, if you really want to work in sport, just get any job you can to get in and get the experience wherever you have to go in the world to do it, because then you're in the swimming pool and you're getting wet and you're finding out how it works. I certainly think that exposing yourself to as much sport as you can, travelling, I think learning foreign languages, I think, is increasingly important in the sports arena. And I think particularly you've just got to go out and get some experience and actually work within the space or within the related space. That's what you have to do, because it's a tough business to get into. I mean, everybody would like to work in sport, or within reason, most people would. If I give advice to anybody, I would say find out whatever your passion is, if you can work in it, and whether your passion would be the theatre or music or architecture or whatever it is, that's what you should work in. Now, a lot of us have a genuine passion for sport, so therefore it doesn't feel like work. I mean, my wife is absolutely convinced that I don't actually need to go to all the sports events, but I think you do, and you have to go out and find out about the business of sport. But you're absolutely right, the media landscape is changing radically, and in many ways, particularly in the agency world, you have to reinvent yourself, because there's an inbuilt redundancy in what you do if you're an agent, because very often you're showing other people how to do it and how to exploit new rights, and then those federations or rights holders will go and do it themselves. And I think we're seeing a lot of people now, a lot of federations and rights holders are taking what they're doing in-house. So it's very interesting. I mean, and the other big change in the landscape is that probably the involvement of capital markets in the sports business. A long time ago, when I worked for Art McCormack and there was ISL, these were just big agencies who were working in that space. Football clubs weren't public companies. Now it's a very different if you look at what's happening with Bridgepoint and venture capitalists in floating companies like Perform that I was involved with floating on the stock market. It's a very different commercial environment.